Welcome back. Well, you heard all the hype. You might have watched the games. We showed you the highlights. Now let's break it down. What can we take from Saturday's win and losses? It's time for Saturday's storylines with the squad. So we're going to start with Alex Heinert in Grand Forks. With UND, Alex, despite the lopsided final score, North Dakota has to feel like they kind of missed a great opportunity to get a road win over a ranked opponent this week. And other than losing the turnover battle, where did this game kind of swing in Southern Utah's favor?
Well, Kelly, UND had a number of chances in the first half and early in the second to do some damage, and they just didn't come up with the goods often enough to come away with the victory. On North Dakota's second to last possession of the second quarter, they drive 70 yards down to the Southern Utah 5, but they get stuffed on a 4th and 1, and they come away empty. And then after a stop on the next possession and a great punt return by John Santiago, they got a chance to get points before the half, but Santiago gets tackled inbounds on this play with no timeouts left, and the clock runs out. And then in the third quarter, they turn it over deep in their own territory, and it looks like UND is going to hold SUU to a field goal, but the T-Birds end up converting on a 4th and 1 to extend their lead to 13 points instead of 9. There were moments like this really all game long, and obviously Southern Utah deserved to win the football game. The final margin was 26 points, but like so many games this year, I feel like North Dakota knows they could have come up with a better result had just a couple of moments swung the other direction.
Well, don't you worry, Alex. UND was not the only team that struggled with turnovers this Saturday. So for more on that, we bring in Shawn, who is in Fargo, talking about the Dakota marker game. Shawn, NDSU going into this was second in the FCS in turnover margin. On the other side, South Dakota State had only forced 11 turnovers on the year. They turned the Bison over 5 times in this one. So what can you say about that?
Yeah, it was the perfect recipe for disaster for North Dakota State. You know, they're a team that is built on ball control, running the football and taking care of the football and not beating themselves. And for the first time this season, they really did beat themselves. You know, it was plays like this, Easton Stick fumbling the football. Just when you think North Dakota State's got some momentum, South Dakota State made the plays they needed to make. And it is another turnover inside Jack's territory. Darius Shepard turns it over there. You know, that ended that drive. And it wasn't only that, it was the penalties too on special teams. North Dakota State had some good returns, had some opportunities for some field positions that were called back by penalties, and they were constantly playing from behind the chains, were constantly playing from deep in their own territory. And give credit to South Dakota State. They made the plays, and that was the difference in the football game.
Well, speaking of South Dakota State, we're going to talk about the Jackrabbits, the beneficiaries of those Bison turnovers. So, Tom, obviously the defense was great for South Dakota State, but you want to talk about the run game, not only on the offensive side, but the defensive side as well.
Yeah, the rushing numbers. Yeah, the defense was great. Taryn Christian was great for South Dakota State. The most points, 33, that South Dakota State has scored in this marker series. But the way that South Dakota State's offensive and defensive line played and held up against the Bison was a huge story. For the second straight marker game now, the Jacks had more rushing yards and rushing attempts than the Bison did, and that's a huge departure from the last 6 games in this series that North Dakota State has dominated. In the 6 marker wins before these last 2 years, there was a 150-yard per game difference in the rushing yards. There were a couple games in the marker series where the Jackrabbits had negative rushing yards, so that totally turned around here in the last 2 weeks, and especially on Saturday. South Dakota State kind of had their way up front on the defensive and offensive line. The Jacks had 36 more rushing yards on Saturday, 144 total for South Dakota State, 123 of those in the second half when they went on a long drive in the fourth quarter, an 86-yard drive, and kind of put it away. And you count the turnovers and the way that the offense played. And in the red zone, South Dakota State was really good. 5 out of 5 in the red zone, 3 touchdowns, 2 field goals against a Bison team that had only allowed 10 red zone trips in 5 games coming into this, and the Jacks got there 5 times and scored 5 times.
Yeah,
it was a really good overall performance by the Jackrabbits.
It was impressive, and the Bison only giving up 10.1 points per game, and Jackrabbits put 33 up on them. All right, well, moving back to the negative turnover battle. Jay Elsen, you were in Cedar Falls on Saturday with the Yotes, and we talked about this at our desk a little bit earlier in the day, but you look at the box score in this game, and every single thing, if you didn't know the outcome, looks like USD comes away with the win, a 2-touchdown win maybe at that. But costly turnovers late for the Yotes.
Yeah, and that's one thing that has not hurt this team all season long is those turnovers, and they gave it away 4 times in that loss at Northern Iowa. 3 of those ended up coming on consecutive possessions in the fourth quarter and were the direct result of why this team lost the game, because 2 of those, of course, led to points that led to the ultimate difference in this football game. But there's a little bit of a trend, a negative one that's developed here over the past few weeks. And so far to this point, in the Coyotes' 7 wins this season, they are plus 14 in turnover margin, 16 takeaways, just 2 turnovers. They've outscored opponents in those games 56-7 off of turnovers. On the other side, the 2 losses, 2 in the last 3 weeks at Illinois State, now at Northern Iowa, Coyotes are -5, 6 turnovers, just 1 takeaway, and they've been outscored 20-0 on turnovers. And so in a game like this, you have no choice but to look right at that number as the sole reason you lost the football game. And that's got to be the most frustrating part for Bob Nielsen, Chris Strevler, and this Coyote offense, which has been so dynamic and so explosive throughout the season and mistake-free. They've done a really good job, for the most part, not giving the football away and creating extra opportunities for their opponents. And in the 2 losses, it's been quite a different story that way.
Well, I feel like this whole weekend kind of epitomized the Missouri Valley in a whole. I mean, North Dakota State goes down. We had upsets like Western Illinois over Illinois State. And then, of course, number 6, USD, losing in Cedar Falls. So there are a bunch of Valley teams at 4-2 in the league right now. A bunch of 7-win teams. But, Bishan, we'll start with you. These last 2 weeks, a lot of these teams have to play each other. I mean, how do you see this turning out with the playoffs, pretty close?
How these teams rebound after maybe some disappointing performances. We saw South Dakota State a few weeks ago, didn't really look like a contender, got beat at home by 20 pretty handily by Northern Iowa. The last 3 weeks, they look like an entirely different football team. We've seen Illinois State get hammered 42-7 by Southern Illinois and then rally back and win some big games. We saw them give up a 14-point lead. So it really is a situation where you have to show up every week and play with a lot of effort. But when you look at North Dakota State, as bad as things went on Saturday, they are still all alone in first place. If they win their last 2 games, they win the Missouri Valley outright. If they win this Saturday against South Dakota, they win at least a share of the title for the 7th straight year. So, despite how things have gone, I think the Bison still feel pretty good. They're in the position they're in. That being said, the challenges continue to come. South Dakota at home, very prolific offense, and then at Illinois State, a team you're not sure what you're going to see last game of the year. And ironically, South Dakota State faces the same 2 opponents opposite weeks than North Dakota State. So it's going to be fun in the last couple of weeks of the year.
And the Bison have been fine until this last game. It's 1 game. And USD and North Dakota State both coming off not very good games going at each other this weekend. That is going to be fabulous.
Oh, man.
There are already 20 teams that have won 7 games in the FCS. The whole playoff field is 24 teams. By the time we get to the end of the regular season in 2 weeks, there's going to be more than 30 teams that have 7 wins. I don't know if 7 is going to be the magic number this year to get you in the playoffs. It's obviously not across the board, but if you have 7 in the Missouri Valley, you think that should be enough.
It should be enough, and I would think that past history would indicate that will have. If you get 7 and you get 4 wins in the Valley, you should be in the playoffs, because it's far and away, it's proven time and time again, the toughest league in the country, and it's not even close. And you can compare this league to a lot of FBS leagues and still say that. So I think 7 wins should be enough for Valley teams. But yeah, certainly these coaches out here, in the face of some really difficult competition here over the next couple of weeks, are all looking at, we don't want to deal with that. We want to get win number 8, and then they'll feel really good about where they're sitting.
Yeah, 2 weeks to go. We'll see how it all plays out. Looking forward to it. Well, thanks, guys.
I bet.
All right, coming up after the break, we send it up to Grand Forks, where our own Alex Heinert recaps North Dakota hockey's weekend series in the Badger State. We'll be right back.